Mjambo, jina langu ni Rugare, Mugumbate. I am a member of Mtandao, that's the Africa Social Work and Development Network, a research associate with the University of Johannesburg, a sabbatical fellow with the Midland State University in Zimbabwe, and a social work academic at the University of Wollongong in Australia. I'm going to talk about social work and development on the African continent, focusing on the role of Ubuntu in the decolonization of the profession. So I come from Zimbabwe, the country marked in green there on the continent of Africa. That's where my permanent home is, on the country of Nyashanu. In Australia, I work at the University of Wollongong, that is in the state of New South Wales, on Dharawa country. So before I go further, I wish to pay my respects to the Dharawa people on whose country I work and on whose country the University of Wollongong is situated. I'm happy to be working for a university, that's the University of Wollongong, that acknowledges the devastation and impact of colonization on its campus's footprint and commits itself to truth-telling, healing, and education. I am going to address four topics. That's the history of social services on the African continent, the emergence of the social development and developmental approach, Ubuntu philosophy. Then I'll end by sharing with you Ubuntu-inspired development models and frameworks. I hope you will learn and enjoy this from this presentation. So number one, the history of social work and social services on the African continent. I will start with the history of social services, focusing on indigenous social services. So these services existed since time immemorial, and as always, they are grounded in Ubuntu. I will talk more about what Ubuntu is in later sections of this presentation. The indigenous services, they ensured social security, harmony, individual and family social functioning, environmental warfare, as well as spiritual fulfillment. So it was a whole package, and it is still a whole package because indigenous services, they never died. They are still being provided. They are mainly provided by family members, community members, community and societal leaders, spiritual leaders of Africa religion. And in the past, in Africa, there was no urban or rural. It was just a society, different from today, where we've got urban and rural, and we've got more developed services for the urban, but no services for the rural. So the village and the homestead were key or central institutions of society. With urbanization, this has changed now. The village and Musha, they are still key institutions, but mainly for people who live in the rural communities. They are now urban communities where people in urban communities have developed newer and perhaps in other cases temporary homesteads. And that shows a shift from when indigenous services were more prominent on the African continent. Then there was no Ethiopia, there was no Zimbabwe, there was no Sudan, there was no Somalia, there was no South Africa, no Namibia, no Botswana. It was just Africa, one land of Africa. And as you see later on, the people living on the continent were sharing common values. I will be talking about these values later on. Now, around 1500, which I call the colonial phase of social services in Africa, just note that I'm avoiding to put the word social work and using social services to show the growth of these services from the indigenous services now to colonial social services. So these started with Abrahamic religion missionaries, those coming from the Islamic and the Christian backgrounds. They came to Africa. They promoted European and Arabic spirituality, social services, and education. They were more focused on religion, and more non-religious Europeans and Arabs, they followed them. So these missionaries paved way for others to follow. Later in the 1600s to 700s, 1700s, slavery was started to force us to go to work outside the continent. That's in Asia, that's in Europe, but also in in the Americas. So this was a brutal period where Africans were enslaved as commodities for centuries. And when it was no longer profitable, that's slavery, Europeans and Arabs, they decided to enslave us on the African continent instead of shipping us outside of the continent. So at that period, there were no social services to really talk about, except that Africans were seen as commodities. When they were provided health services, for example, during slavery, it was to ensure that they could be transported to the Caribbean, for example. They could be transported to Europe, for example. That was the essence of providing services to the African at that point in time. Around the end of the 1800, missionaries initiated social services and education. So they expanded their work from doing more missionary work to convert people. They now initiated social services. But the idea was to ensure that they get more converts. They were providing their services to those who were converted. And when they did outreaches, it was to ensure that they capture more people. However, during that period, indigenous social services continued, and there was sort of a competition between the indigenous providers of social services and the missionaries. Through a biblical message that said, "Love thy visitor," missionaries paved way for more colonial settlers to come and for colonization to continue on the African continent, such that in 1884, a meeting of European colonists in Berlin, Germany, it divided us amongst themselves. That's when African countries or country borders were created. Remember, as I said earlier on, there were no borders on the African continent. So colonial social services continued, but now they took another turn. The missionaries were still providing their services, but they were now colonial administrators in places like Congo, in places like South Africa. Actually, in South Africa, they had started earlier, in places like Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, the Sudan, Ghana, Somalia, except, of course, for Ethiopia, which resisted colonization and defeated the Italians in battle. Now, Europeans continued to grow on the African continent. The way was paved by the missionaries, but also by the explorers and researchers and anthropologists who viewed Africans as friendly, as welcoming, as hospitable. So that paved way for more Europeans to come to colonize and settle on the continent. Their numbers increased. They started urban centers. The cities that we know today, Johannesburg in South Africa, had formed much earlier, but cities like Harare were formed around towards the end of the 1800s. Gaborone in Botswana, Lilongwe in Malawi. That's the time they were formed by Europeans because they were increasing in numbers. So they formed urban communities that they were more comfortable with. And that's what was the geographical situation where they were coming from Europe, the Americas, and all over the world. So while they were developing these communities, they also developed industries and they needed labor. So the easiest thing was to take our ancestors to work for them in their homes, on streets, in industries, in mines. In most cases, this was entirely free labor that was provided to the Europeans for generations. And this income, this wealth generated from our ancestors was used for to build their stocks of wealth in Africa, but also outside Africa. So countries where they came from benefited a lot from the sweat of our ancestors. The European populations in Africa increased. Their children became teenagers, but they were very naughty and delinquent. So that was a major challenge. And in places like Zimbabwe, they had established Harare as their city. They called it Salisbury, Salisbury. Well, that's a tough language, but I'll call it Salisbury. That's what we call it back home. They started Salisbury. They had their teenagers. They were very naughty and they had challenges dealing with them, perhaps also because they were spending a lot of time working without attention to their children. They then decided to import social welfare and child welfare workers from Europe and America. Just to note how the language is changing now. Now we are talking of social welfare and child welfare. It wasn't called social work then. This is around 1900. They were called social welfare and child welfare workers, and it also reflects what was happening. Social work then had not developed into a full-fledged profession. It is then even in Europe and the Americas. In Zimbabwe, the first import came in the 1930s, marking the beginning of state social welfare in the country. In other countries, the imports happened in the 1920s, but in South Africa, this had happened earlier. In the 1920s, Black workers and families increased in urban areas. As I said before, they were being allowed into the urban areas in restrictions. But for those who were allowed, they were allowed to work in industries, in homes, but also on the streets to support the white population. The colonists started training Black people as child workers, community workers, and welfare workers, mainly to ensure that the Black population, the Black children, and those who were coming to cities to work were controlled. So we can then say that social welfare or community work were used as methods of controlling people as opposed to providing social services. The syllabus or the curricula for the lecturers, the philosophy, the theories, the pedagogies, the case studies, and the language that was used in the training all came from Europe or America. So we can say the training was exported by the Europeans and Americans to Africa. And this was the same situation in Ethiopia, was the same situation in Egypt, was the same situation in Ghana, in Senegal, in Cameroon, in Central African Republic. It was the same situation. Social work imported wholesome from France, for example, into Burkina Faso or into Senegal. From certificates training initially to diploma training to bachelor training to masters and now their PhDs. This then developed into social work as we know it today. 37 countries, it could even be more. They now have a social work qualification in Africa, and others have got related qualifications. They may not be called social work, but they are classified as social work. In total, there are 290 higher education institutions that train social workers on the African continent. Here is a summary from a 2021 directory by the Association of Schools of Social Work. It shows that Kenya has got the highest number of social work education institutions on the African continent. That's about 51, followed by Nigeria with 49. Also, Tanzania is also on top, South Africa with 17. There are others with 6, for example, Rwanda. Zimbabwe has got 7. There should be slightly more now. Malawi has got 7. Others that are not listed here have got between 0 and 5. Social work has increased, as you can see, in numbers, the numbers of institutions, but also the number of people graduating. There are actually more people graduating than the social work jobs that are available in any country on the African continent, including South Africa and Egypt. Relevance is still a major issue. What people are being trained in versus the needs that are available, there's still a huge mismatch, and the result is not comfortable. It includes migration. For example, while I'm presenting this, I'm doing this from outside the continent. I'm at the University of Wollongong in Australia, where I work. So migration is a major issue. Unemployment is also very high for social workers on the African continent. So I'll end there about the history of social work and social services on the African continent, but jump on to a closely related development on the continent. That's the social development and the developmental approaches, how they developed on the African continent. I'll start off by talking about the ASWEA, that's the Association of Social Work Education in Africa, that existed between 1965 to 1989. It was formed primarily to change the social work profession on the African continent, and their intention was to change it to social development or to indigenize or to decolonize the profession. Why was this necessary, or why is this objective necessary today? It is because of what I said earlier on. There is a mismatch between the training of social workers presently and the needs on the ground. Social work, as it is designed, is a profession or a discipline that was designed outside the continent, primarily in the US and in the UK and Germany and other European countries. And the ideas, the theories, the philosophies, the methods, and the objectives are primarily based on its source, where it came from as a profession. Resultantly, the way it is today, social work does not adequately address the social issues on the African continent. So that's why there was a move towards social development or the developmental approach. So ASWEA was based in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, was founded by Selassie Gabriel, as well as Arega Imam. It closed, that's the ASWEA, in 1989, probably due to lack of succession after Dr. Imam's poor health and subsequent death. Gabriel was born in 1936, studied at the University College Addis Ababa, coming out with an MA in Social Service Administration in 1959. Then went to India at the renowned Tata Institute of Social Work for an MA in sociology in 1961. Got a PhD from the University of Michigan in 1976. Worked in community development, including senior positions in Ethiopia. Also taught at the Haile Selassie University between 1967 and 1968, and even became the dean. So besides founding the ASWA, he was also vice president of the International Association of Schools of Social Work, and also a member of the Executive Council of the International Council of Social Welfare. There is a reference for you to read more about Selassie, one of the founders of the social development approach on the African continent. A bit about Imam, who is one of the contributors to the social development theory, was very passionate about social development, and his thesis was on social development in Africa. That's the one I'm showing there with a green book cover. That was Arega's thesis. He was more interested in ensuring that there is self-reliance and the services provided on the African continent were less labor intense, was more concerned with the redistributive policies. So we can look at him as a political social worker, was interested in popular participation. Cooperatives were very popular then, and was more concerned about rural development because, as I said earlier, urban communities were initiated by the settlers, and people then moved from the rural communities to work for the settlers in the urban communities, and more people then left to work in the urban communities. Then urban communities grew, and they were provided with better roads, not to say adequate, but compared to rural communities, they had better social services. Now, for Imam, the rural communities were neglected, and there was need for public expenditure towards the development of rural communities. He looked at China as a model for Africa, was very critical of aid and structural adjustment programs. He also ended with a PhD that's at the University of Bristol that was awarded posthumously. Development should be based on African philosophy to indigenize and to decolonize it. That's what I can say to sum up Arega Imam's ideas about social development. There were other people who then developed this idea further from what Arega and colleague and others in the ASWIA did. One of them is Tess Faye, who came up with the developmental social work curricula. That was a very comprehensive document that talked about what institutions in Africa who are training social service professionals should be focusing on to make their curricula more developmental. For example, he was concerned with a curricula that is less remedial and more developmental and preventative. Instead of social services that's designed for social control, that's designed to provide welfare, he was talking about community development. He was also talking about education. He said education was important, and training, and he was also more concerned with social development workers with the skills to deliver at the different levels of society instead of working at the individual level to remedy social situations. Then there's also Kaseke. It's becoming more recent now. This is 2001. So Kaseke talked about the Africa social development model. In that model, there's emphasis on social factors in the development process. After realizing that the modernization approach that was used to deliver social work on the African continent, it had failed to address even urban poverty, rural marginalization. Actually, it increased marginalization of rural communities. Writers like Kaseke then said, oh yeah, we need to focus on addressing social issues more adequately. We need to consider the economic aspects of development as well. We don't have to wait for what's called trickle-down effect in modernization theory. That's a theory that says we need to come up with these big factories, big urban centers. We need to mechanize, and when we do that, we develop wealth in urban communities, farming communities, or industrial communities, and that wealth will then cascade to all the remote, regional, and communities that are not developed. So this has not happened, and those at the bottom were sinking further down. Those are the rural communities. So Kaseke and others then said, what we need is the Africa social development approach in support of what the ASWIA had proposed years before. To address mass poverty, absolute poverty, that's what I'm talking about here. They said it was important for social work to focus more on non-warfaristic approaches, and these are developmental approaches to take people out of poverty and to address the root causes of poverty. He emphasized operating at the societal and structural level, but still recognizing that work at the individual, family, and community level was useful. Then further on the developmental approach or the developmentalist paradigm, others call it the developmentalist theory. People that I can associate with this, the theorists I can associate with this, Pedziswa in 2001, Watchfeld in 2009, and Lombardi and Wairire in 2010. So this is also more recent. These are more recent ideas about development of social work on the African continent. They talked about creating opportunities for economic productivity. As you have seen with Kaseke's theory, the economy is really important. Supporting improving farming, irrigation, mining, fishing, or farm income generating projects, self-employment, and enterprises. This is central to the developmentalist paradigm. In their theory, they talked about lobbying and advocacy for social justice and infrastructure, mobilizing local services, and improving people's income productivity skills. They also emphasized the strength approach, where communities contribute and their contribution is valued. Community strength is pursued, not only pursued, but is also recognized by government, by institutions, by leaders, by the different programs and policies that are put in place to address mass poverty and take people out of absolute poverty. They said it was important for education in development to be included in social work curricula, but also as standalone qualifications, for example, a bachelor or a master's in development or a social work with a development track or a major in development. These are critical ideas as far as improving social work on the African continent, to decolonize it, to indigenize it, and to make it more relevant is concerned. I've talked about the ASWA approach to social development. I've also talked about Kaseke's approach. I've also talked about Pedziswa, Wairire, Watchfeld, and Lombardi's approaches to the developmentalist paradigm. But these are not the only approaches to social development. There are many others. The Women Empowerment Framework, or Longwe Framework for Gender Analysis by Sarah Longwe from Zambia, is a very persuasive approach when it comes to women and development on the African continent. There's also the Indigenous Research Methodology by Bagele Chirisa, who is a Motswana woman. That's also very persuasive in ensuring that research has impact. The Theory of Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo, again from Zambia, is really critical of the role aid has played in Africa and the challenges that aid presents, especially by the challenge of ensuring that local demand for services is subdued, local innovation is subdued, and all those other things. And Dambisa Moyo was mainly concerned with development aid. There's also the human factor approach to development by Claude Mararike from Zimbabwe. Then there's the Made in Africa evaluation approach, which is very critical for administrators of development services. Around the environment, the Green Belt Movement model by Wangari Maathai, a Nobel Prize winner for environmental work, is also very popular and necessary if embedded in social work, to improve it on the African continent. There's also the African Union. It has got several models on development, on rural development, on the environment and gender, and many other models that are relevant to social work. The African Renaissance approach of Thabo Mbeki, former president of South Africa, is also quite important because it looks into the future. It doesn't focus on now, but it looks at the Africa that we want, or the Africa that we hope to achieve, or the Africa that we want the children of our children to enjoy in the future. And that ties with Afrofuturism, that's looking into the future, combining all these ideas that I'm talking about and saying how can they contribute to an Africa that is able to address the needs of its people more sustainably. So that's it about the models. So looking at the models and the history of African social work, what can we say? What has changed? So social work hasn't changed much. However, the social development approach, it has grown. It incorporates more disciplines now, not just social work. South Africa and Zimbabwe, for example, they changed their admin departments for social work to Department of Social Development from Department of Social Welfare. The idea here is to reflect the need to focus on development. So developmental and socio-economic development approaches, they have grown on the continent. There is now a journal of social development. There's also the Southern Africa Journal of Social Work and Social Development. And more recently, in 2019, the Africa Social Work and Development Network, that's Mtandao, was formed to advance the social development approach, taking on from where the ASWER left some several years ago. Mtandao is more concerned in globalizing African knowledge, ensuring that African knowledge is not only used in Africa, but also to change communities around the world. It does more mentoring in community, in development-focused work. It focuses more on decolonizing and indigenizing, and also provides opportunities for lifelong learning. I'll go to part number 3, where I'm talking about Africa's philosophy. So in part 1 and part 2, I was referring to philosophy, but now I'll give a bit of information about Africa's philosophy so that you understand it. And if you already know about it, that's an opportunity for you to reflect and even learn more or newer ideas about African philosophy. So what I'm showing now is the map of Africa, and it shows the different names of African philosophy. These are the names of Africa philosophy throughout the world, throughout the continent. And there are common values among these the philosophies that I'm showing. Relations, they are a key. It's common among all these philosophies that I'm showing. And culture, indigeneity, that's the focus on what is indigenous, what is an indigenous African. Holism or holistic approaches to life, they are common. Justice and freedom, the way it is understood is also common. Responsibility, the way it is understood is also common. Then community, reciprocity is also common, as well as respect. The way these ideas are understood, they are commonly understood, and they share lots of similarities in terms of their understanding among Black Africans. And Black Africans, they include the Kush around the north, the Nile Sahara around the northeast, the Bantu found all over from the west to the southern tip of the continent. The Sai and the Sani and the Khoi were found mainly in Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. The Hadzabe, mainly found in Tanzania. The Mbambenga, Bambuti were mainly found in the Great Lakes region, as well as the Batwa. These are all the different groups of people in Africa, and they share these common values. If you look at the names of Africa philosophy that I'm showing, most of them have got two. TU. So I'm calling that the two terminology. Linguists have done a lot of research about this, and they have concluded that the two spread due to migration that happened between from 4000 before present time. That's how the two language are spread. But migration also happened earlier from North Africa, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia. People migrated downwards because of desertification, but also because of contact with people who were coming from the Middle East, but also from Europe, and they were occupying the continent. Now, this philosophy has got a name. It's referred to as Ubuntu. As I said, there are many names for the philosophy, but Ubuntu has become very popular. The two language has become very popular because of the migrations that I talked about, mainly of the Bantu people on the continent. What are the major levels of Ubuntu philosophy? There are several ways of looking at Ubuntu philosophy. My favorite one is to divide it into levels, beginning with the family or relational level, that's Ukama level, then Ujamaa, which is community level, then Ujami, which is societal level, then there's also the environmental level and the spiritual level. That's a simplified yet more persuasive way of looking at Ubuntu without limiting it to one level. Here I've provided information about what each level of Ubuntu entails. The individual level is mainly about looking at needs, rights, choices, failures, progress, crime interventions, etc., viewing them through the family and community. It pertains to the individual, but viewing it from the family or the community. Then family aspects, they focus on Ubuntu as the foundation of African families, again looking at needs, choices, desires, resources through the larger family, the tribal family, the clan family, and the community. Community aspects, it looks at community members and families in the expectation of collectivity. When you look at families, the way they work, when you look at community, the way they work, you are always thinking about reciprocity. You are always thinking about responsibility and collectivity. Reciprocity especially is really important because it ensures that families support each other, communities support each other, or even individuals within them support each other with the expectation that I support someone today, I will be supported in the future. It may not happen tomorrow, it may not happen next week, but support will come to me, to my family, or to my community. That's reciprocity, and it's a key value. There are also social aspects of Ubuntu. There are also environmental aspects like Musha that I talked about earlier. Under societal, the issue of justice is really important. Then there are also spiritual aspects as well of Ubuntu, the connectedness that happens between God, the living, the deceased, the respect for relatives, for elders, all that for land, for country, all those are crucial spiritual aspects under Ubuntu philosophy. It's really broad. It's not just an aspect. It's a philosophy. It's a philosophy, and as a philosophy, it appears at different levels. And I just tried to do a summary of it, but it's not possible to summarize everything about a philosophy of a whole continent. Now, turning back to social work. Ubuntu, as a philosophy, it shapes social work on the African continent, as you can see from these four domains of social work. Domain number one about social work in Africa is about family. Again, this is a key aspect or a key level in Ubuntu. Domain two is about communities. Domain three is about society, and the domain four is about environment. So these levels of Ubuntu are covered in these domains, and that's how social work links with Ubuntu, or how Ubuntu is embedded in social work on the African continent. Finally, number four, I'll look at Ubuntu-inspired development models, as well as frameworks, focusing or emphasizing decolonization, indigenization, globalization, and also the use of African knowledges. I think the best starting point is to look at the African Union That's Umoja wa Africa. That's the association of all countries, all 54 countries on the African continent. And currently there is Agenda 2063, which is a program of action that emphasizes the Africa that we want. I'll give a bit of information about Agenda 2063. It has got one vision and 7 aspirations. The vision is an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own citizens, representing a dynamic force in the international arena. And the aspirations, just to pick 2 because there are 7. An integrated continent, politically united and based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of the African Renaissance. If you remember, previously I gave you a model by Thabo Mbeki on the African Renaissance, and we see that in the African Union 7 aspirations. The other aspiration is Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. Again, this is derived from Ubuntu, and I've already given you the common values that are found among the Black people of Africa. Another model is the Musha model of rural development, which focuses on the bottom-up approach. If you recall, I said development in most African communities and social work in most African communities is urban-centered. The focus is on urban warfare, urban social problems, urban social control, and rural communities are neglected. And the developmental paradigm of Kaseke, of Lombard, of Wairire, it talks about leaving no one behind, ensuring that rural communities that if the majority of the populations of Africa, they are not left as far as development or social work is concerned. So Musha model is about merging Ubuntu agriculture and development. There are many aspects of the Musha model. And why is it important? Why is Musha model important? It's because 70% of people in Africa, they live on Musha or Nyumba, and more than 90% have a Musha or a Nyumba. So Musha is really important, which is why in my introduction, I told you that my permanent home or Musha is in Sanga community in Mavregudo. That's why I was emphasizing that Mavregudo is a sub leader, and Nyashanu. Nyashanu is the chief in the area where I come from. Now, Musha means permanent home. As I said earlier, is the first and smallest geographical unit in African society. It is a place to live with the environment. That's where the environment comes in. It is a place to be productive. It is a place to enjoy culture, and also a resting place after death. It is not only a social entity, it's economic, it's spiritual, it's environmental, it's humanistic. That's the Musha that I'm talking about. Now, Musha model, it promotes Nyumba or Musha as a place for various economic and activities, embedding technology in there as well, enterprises, and many other things that are done to sustain livelihoods and to benefit the community and the nation. So that's a combination of culture, community, technology, as well as enterprises. Musha enhances family livelihoods, which is what the development paradigm promotes. I would want to read this from Taranike, who is the one who came up with the Musha model, or maybe let me say the one who wrote about the Musha model, because it existed even before colonization as part of the indigenous social services that I talked about. So Taranike said, as a whole, the Musha model provides a holistic and integrated approach in rural development and enhancing livelihoods, starting with the traditional homestead within the community, living in harmony with nature while promoting our culture and improving knowledge co-creation through science and technology, and using the integral kumusha as an enterprise to generate income for the home, the community, and the nation at large. So it's not only about the home, it's not only about the family, it's about generating wealth for the community, for the nation, and for the continent at large. So if all Musha is to be developed that way, considering that over 70% of people on the continent have live on Musha, and over 90%, including those in the urban and those in the outside the continent, those in the diaspora, they've got Musha. If Musha is to be developed more economically, it could be a central point to initiate and accelerate development on the African continent, in line with what developmental paradigms say, that we should focus on preventing social problems as opposed to remedying them. We should focus on creating wealth and resources to support livelihoods as opposed to aid. Finally, I would want to say looking back is really important. Looking back into philosophy is really important. Looking back into indigenous knowledges is really important. In Africa, there's what we call Sankofa. Sankofa is a bird that is often depicted looking back. And the idea is that you learn more by looking back. Go back to your heritage, go back to your knowledge, those indigenous knowledges, those indigenous systems. They will support you going forward. So that's called Sankofa in Africa. I've talked about social work. I've talked about social development, where social work is on the African continent at the moment. It's really important for me to just give a summary of the barriers. Brain drain and energy drain it's a key issue. It's not only brains that are leaving the continent, but also energy. People who should be working, they are leaving the continent. So those drains are happening. Then decolonization has not happened completely, which is why social work institutions today, they are still using external curricula with no textbooks generated. Although there's work to fill those gaps, there's still a lot that has to happen. Then there are also challenges with different value systems, especially those brought in by religions, but also the issue of Western laws as well as human rights approaches. At times, there's no action from us as academics, as advocates, as social workers, as thinkers. At times, there's more talk and there's no action. We need to be doing more. So work that I talked about, for example, the Africa Social Work and Development Network, which is Mtandao, is work that is pushing a lot of these narratives, but also doing more practical work like mentoring, generating literature, and the like. There are also challenges with African politics, migration. It relates to brain drain. There's also the issue of poor administration and corruption on the continent. It relates to African politics as well. Then also, of course, there is need for social work training that responds to the local needs. I would want to end here by giving you some ideas to think about, to do your own reflection or to discuss with others. So I will not read this. I'll just show them and you can read them yourself. But more importantly, I think about what Ubuntu offers if it is maximized, not only in Africa, but globally. And also think about local resources that could be used for sustainable development. Look at these as opportunities for development of the profession on the African continent. I recommend this resource if you want to learn more about Ubuntu in a funny way. That this is a short video on Ubuntu that I have created, and it's on YouTube. There's also this resource, Symbols from Africa, Adingra Signs and West Africa. They use the QR code to learn more about these Adingra signs and their relevance to social work. There is also this link to Ubuntu resources. There's a long list of resources that you'll find on this website about Ubuntu. Further, information can also be obtained using those additional links from Mutandao, the Africa Social Work and Development Network. I would want to end here by saying Kanimambo, zikomo kwambili, morakoze, asante sana, maitabasi.